Hey guys, Will here. So Logitech created quite a stir in the sim racing community a few days ago when they announced their not so brand new G923 racing wheels. So there's been a couple of things that have been coming up over the last few days, and we did a deep dive video talking about the technology behind their new TRUEFORCE force feedback engine a couple of days ago. So I'd encourage you guys to check that video out before watching this one, because a lot of the details around the theory and stuff like that is covered in a lot more detail in that video than we'll cover in this video. This is going to be much more about the hardware and the overall driving experience. So yeah, the two things that people have been talking about a lot over the last few days. First of all, the lack of physical change in the appearance of the unit compared to the previous versions of the wheels. So in fact, it's not only just the previous version, the G29 and G920, which came out 5 years ago now, looks pretty much identical to those. But in fact, if you go back 3 generations to the G25, which actually came out on my birthday back in 2006, so almost 14 years ago, most of the design, the pedals and the back shell of the wheel itself hasn't changed at all in terms of physical appearance, at least since, you know, right back in 2006. So an interesting little decision there by Logitech to keep things looking the same externally at least. So yeah, that has taken quite a few people, including myself, by surprise. But the thing that people have been talking about most of all is the price increase over the previous generation. So dating all the way back to the G25 when that originally came out, the pricing's always been around about the $500 Australian mark, retail at least. And you've been able to pick these up for closer to about the $350 mark if you were in the right place at the right time. Obviously with the pandemic recently, pricing has gone absolutely through the roof, and we've seen people selling these for absolutely ridiculously high pricing. But generally speaking, regular retail has been around the $500 Australian mark. But with the new G923 wheels, we are now looking at a retail price of quite a lot more than that at $800 Australian dollars. So that raises a few questions in terms of value for money. Not only is it a reasonable upgrade from the G920 and the G29s, as it should be for the additional increase in price, but in fact, is it even good value for money when compared to other products that fall around that same price range? So at the $800 Australian mark, you know, we're starting to compare this now to products like the belt-driven Thrustmaster wheels, as well as Fanatec's more entry-level CSL Elite range. So we're going to be unpacking all of those things in detail in today's video, and I will provide timestamps for you guys below as well that might want to skip through various sections. Now, originally I was expecting it to be quite some time before I could actually get my hands on this wheel, but I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Dan from Logitech here in Australia, who actually saw the video we did a couple of days ago talking about the theory and actually reached out to me. And it turns out he only lives about 20 minutes away from my house. So he came out in the pouring rain on Friday and delivered both of these to me to test out for you guys. So big thank you to Dan. But another really interesting thing that's happened in the last few days as well is Logitech's global product manager for simulation, Richard Neville, actually reached out to me as well on Reddit of all places. And it turns out he's actually really active within the community there, answering a lot of people's questions. And he was actually kind enough to spend a bit of time with me tonight, right before filming this, to actually go through a lot of these questions that I've seen coming up. So what I wanted to do, first of all, before we dive into taking the clothes off these guys and going for a drive and all those sorts of things, is actually approach some of those questions with him head on that I know you guys have been wondering about. So first of all, let's address TRUEFORCE technology. And I know one of the questions that you guys have been really wondering about is, will it be possible to upgrade the firmware in the older G29 and G920 to make it TRUEFORCE compatible? Now, with the physical designs being very similar between the new wheels and the older versions, you might think that that's possible. But I actually asked him this question. What I said to him was, will a firmware update allow TRUEFORCE to work with other wheels? I assume that there are physical hardware changes as far as the USB interface is concerned, and it would take more than just a firmware upgrade to enable the faster sample rates that make TRUEFORCE possible. But it'd be good to officially confirm this. And his answer was, yeah, it's definitely not possible to add it to the older wheels for exactly the reasons you say. We've implemented a closed loop electronic system as opposed to the open loop that we had on the older wheels, and beefed up the motor driver as well. Plus, we've had to increase the memory on the processor to handle everything as well. Now, importantly there, when we're talking about a motor driver, we're not talking about the software drivers that you install on your PC. We're talking about the control board that actually drives the motor electronically. So interprets all the signals that are received via the USB interface and then tells the motor what to do. So I just wanted to clarify that first of all. And then I went on to ask him more about the hardware. So I said, while we're on the subject of motors, are there any additional motors for handling the subtle vibrations that are now possible through TRUEFORCE, or is all the new force feedback transmitted through the same dual motor system that we had previously on the G29 and G920? And are the motors themselves identical to the previous versions? And his answer there was, there are no additional motors. It's exactly the same motors as we used in the G29 and G920. The improved motor driver that we were just talking about is what enables us to do the new TRUEFORCE force feedback, so we can produce all of the extra frequencies. So then I went on to ask him, are you able to share the actual peak and holding torque figures for the wheel? And he answered, the peak torque is the same as it was before at about 2.2 Newton meters. So he didn't actually tell me what the holding torque is, but there you go, right from the horse's mouth. The motors that they're using in the G923 are identical to the motors that were used in the G920 and G29 previously. Now we will take the close off these in just a minute and have a look at the gear set to see whether those are identical as well, but I'm not expecting to see any physical differences between the wheels other than the control boards that are actually driving the motors themselves. But there are some physical differences in the pedal themselves, particularly around the brake. So we will have a look at that as well. And I do have my trusty old Logitech G920 here as well. So we will do some direct comparisons both with the wheel as well as the pedals. So as I said before, we will have timestamps throughout the video so you can skip ahead. Now, just before we move on, there is one more comment that I've seen popping up a lot that I want to address as well. And that is, a lot of people have been saying that the G923 is a bit of a cash grab to coincide with the release of the next generation consoles. People are saying they're forcing me to pay, you know, a large percentage more for the G923 over the G920 for next gen console compatibility. So I just wanted to draw your attention to a tweet on the Logitech G Twitter page the other day saying, good news sim racers, each version of the G923 racing wheel and pedals is compatible with either Xbox One or PlayStation 4. So it does have backward compatibility. The new wheels and our current generation wheels will also work with the Xbox Series X, G923 and G920, or PlayStation 5, G923 and G29, pending final SIE product approval. So it looks like, at least at this point, that two things there. So the previous generation wheels, the G920 and the G29, will be compatible with PS5 and Xbox Series X. But also I was able to confirm with our local product manager, at least here in Australia, the G920 and G29 are going to continue concurrently with the G923 as well. So this isn't a forced replacement, so to speak. You can still buy the older generation wheels and they will still be compatible with the next generation consoles pending that SIE approval as per the tweet. So I just wanted to clarify that for you guys as well before we move on. So as I always try to do, I've included some links in the description below to where you can pick up this product. Those links might not be available at the time of launching this video simply because I am releasing this before the product is actually on shelves. But if you do want to help support the channel, those links will be a fantastic way that you can do that. But anyway, that is enough rambling for now. So let's unpack these wheels in more detail and figure out whether they are worth the increased asking price. So I'm not going to bother with a full unboxing here simply because it is a pretty plain and simple box. You open it up, all you have inside is the wheel, the pedals, and then the power supply, which you can see here, and we'll have a look at that in more detail in just a moment. And then a few little bits of pamphlets and stuff. We've got a Logitech G booklet. We've got a Logitech G sticker. We've got a place seat, little brochure as well. And then our important safety and compliance and warranty pamphlet. And that is literally all that is inside the box. Now, also just to clarify for you guys, there isn't a shifter included. So if you do need a shifter, you will be up for the extra money to buy the driving force shifter separately as well. Okay, so in front of us here, we have the G923s, obviously the Xbox version, the PlayStation version. Then we have a last generation G920 here for comparison reasons. So the only thing that I've modded here from stock is the front plate here, which we have our Boosted Media logo. Normally it looks exactly the same as this for the Xbox version and with a PlayStation logo on it for the PlayStation version. Interestingly, with the G923, it's still got the G logo on it even for the PlayStation version. So just one little thing to notice there. But look, there are a few subtle but important differences between the new generation and the last generation. So let's just go over them all one by one. We'll start off with the things that are the same, and there are quite a few of them. So we've got a 280mm diameter wheel in all three cases. And then in terms of the wheel thickness, about 28mm. It does vary a little bit throughout the diameter of the wheel, or the circumference of the wheel, I should say. A little bit skinnier here and here and here, a little bit thicker there, but you know, it's about 28.3mm. Now, while we are on the subject of the wheel rim itself, the same leather material, and it smells exactly the same. That was one of the things I loved about the G27 G920 is you still had that smell of pure, rich leather coming from the wheel years and years later. My G27 still smelt like leather, you know, 10 years after I bought it, which was pretty impressive. But it is exactly the same leather. What they have done, however, is improve the quality of the stitching. Now, I've never had a problem on any of my Logitech wheels with the stitching, but I'm assuming that there was a reason why they've done that. But that is one thing to note there. The stitching quality has definitely improved, and it's a smoother overall finish as well. Another subtle difference is we now have a LED RPM gauge on both the PlayStation and the Xbox versions as well, whereas previously with the G920 and the G29, that was only on the PlayStation version or the G29, not on the G920. And then you'll also notice we now have the 24-way rotary dials as well as the enter and plus and minus switches on both versions of the wheel. Again, with the previous G920, those were not present, only on the PlayStation version. That dial was red on the previous PlayStation version too. So other than that, externally, as far as the wheels go, there are no other physical differences between them, only just cosmetic changes like the blue strip around the top now as opposed to the previous brushed aluminium look. And the paddles on the back of the wheel are now powder coated black instead of the raw brushed aluminium that we had previously. Otherwise, absolutely identical. So we'll just move the PlayStation version aside for the moment and have a closer look at the two Xbox versions side by side. Just want to point out a couple of other little tiny things here too. One of the other changes that we will be taking a look at once we're all hooked up on the PC is the new dual clutch system as well, but I can tell you mechanically it's still just micro switches in the paddles as I suspected, and they feel exactly the same amount of travel on both and no difference at all. So let's just quickly spin them both around as well. And you can see there, again, mechanically identical, G logo on the newer model, Logitech G logo on the older one. And if we flip them upside down as well, just for the sake of completeness, all of the input and output interfacing is exactly the same as well. So you can see there on the underside, we've got a serial port for our pedals. We've got another serial port for our shifter. No handbrake input, which is one bone that I am going to pick with Logitech. I really would have liked to have seen the option of a handbrake accessory. I think that that is definitely a missed opportunity on their part. It would have been seemingly very, very easy to implement, and it would have been another accessory that they could have sold alongside this, and something that people have been asking for quite a long time. So a little bit disappointed to see that missed opportunity. Now, one more thing I just want to point out quickly on the back here as well is the diameter for the hub on the rear is the same between the two as well. So 75 millimeters or 74.2 millimeters. Yeah. 74.5 millimeters, around 75 millimeters. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because it means it is still compatible with those magnetic shifter mods that we reviewed previously on the channel. And these are honestly an absolute game changer for these wheels. I know it sounds silly, but it really does make a huge difference. So I would recommend checking out the video that we did reviewing these. Link is in the description below for you guys, but same diameter, so it is compatible across both wheels as well. Now, just moving the wheels off to the side for a moment here. One thing that Logitech have mentioned previously, and we mentioned it earlier on in the video, is that they have beefed up their driver circuitry or the driver board for the motors themselves. So I thought we might see an increased capacity power supply, but if we have a look at the two power supplies here side by side, the one on the left, this one is the G920 power supply, the one on the right is the new one that came with the G923, and we can see on both of those, the output is identical, 24 volts at 1.75 amps. So identical power supplies between the two as well. So that again tells us that we're not expecting any difference in terms of the overall strength of the wheels compared to each other. So we've taken the clothes off both wheelbases here. We've got the G920 here, the older generation on the left, and the G923 Xbox version on the right. Now, I've intentionally done both Xbox versions here, not the PlayStation version of the 923, because the circuitry is slightly different for the security chip for both. So I thought it would be best to compare Xbox versus Xbox. But look, there's a couple of observations here which I think we need to go through. First of all, the gearbox assemblies are completely identical. The shaft feels exactly the same between the two as well. So there's absolutely no difference difference at all in the feeling between the two whatsoever. So I don't expect there to be a massive amount of difference in the overall force feedback feel, TRUEFORCE aside. We can see that they're using exactly the same motors in both as well. So exactly as Logitech told me, they are physically identical to each other than the motherboard, which is what we expected to see. So I'm not going to go into a massive amount of heavy tech here and electronics on you guys, but the two differences that I can see here looking at them, they are different processors to each other. They are both from the same processor family, so they are ARM STM32 processors, but the one on the G920 is a STM32P 401, whereas the one on the 923 is a STM32F401. So there are some significance between the two in terms of bandwidth as well as processing capacity and memory, exactly as we expected. But the biggest difference between the two boards is in the motor driver circuitry. And you can see from about the midpoint upwards how fundamentally different the boards are from each other. So on the bottom half, we've got all the processing side, and then on the top half, we've got the power supply input. So you can see here where the power is coming in. And then these two connections here are the connections that go out to the motor. And this area here at the top is the driver circuitry. So again, I'm not going to go into super heavy tech here on you guys, but these two little chips that you can see here, these are the motor driver ICs or integrated circuits. So the one on the G920 and G29 is a AM4951, which is a 24 volt 0.5 amp motor driver, meaning that its maximum capacity is 24 volts and 0.5 amps. Then when we move across to the G923, you can see we've got the two driver ICs, one there and one underneath there. And in the case of the G923, they are 8872 motor drivers. Now from the data sheets that I can find, these appear to be 45 volt 3.6 amp motor driver ICs. So they are capable of double the voltage as well as significantly more current too. So again, we're only confirming what Logitech already told us here, but I did want to open this up and show you guys side by side so you could see for yourselves exactly what the differences were. So yeah, theoretically, the driver circuitry in the G923 is capable of a lot more than what the driver circuitry is in the G920 and G29. But anyway, let's have a look at some of the other design features internally while we have the G923 open, and then we'll get into the pedals. Now it's quite funny, even though I owned a G27 for 10 years, I never actually opened one up. This is the first time I've ever had a look inside a Logitech G steering wheel. And I've got to say, I mean, the fact that the internal design is identical between the two tells you that there wasn't really anything that they felt they needed to change from the G920 to make it stronger in any regard. And you can see all the plastic reinforcement internally. Now, I mean, obviously it's not the strongest wheelbase in the world, but all the fundamentals that we need for a wheel of this strength are there. So you can see how the motors are attached directly to a steel plate for the gearbox assembly. And that steel plate is 2 millimeters thick as well, as you can see there. I don't see any other sort of design shortcuts or anything like that internally. Electronically, everything seems sound as well. You've got nice, decent thick gauge wiring for all the motors as well as the power input. And then you got ferrite chokes on the motor outputs as well as all the line ins and line outs for various different data inputs and switches and things like that as well, USB connections and so forth. So yeah, look, I don't see any cause for concern here whatsoever. You can see down the bottom here as well, the mounting brackets where the screws go through if you are hard mounting this to a rig. And those again are 2 millimeter thick steel as well. Now, obviously we'll comment on the rigidity, stability, and all those sorts of things once we get to driving, but I just wanted to give you a quick little look of the internals. Now, if we just quickly spin it around as well, you can see on the front of the gearbox housing here, we've got quite a lot of plastic reinforcement, which adds extra rigidity so you don't get flex up and down, and quite a hefty bearing system in here on the front of the shaft as well. So you can see a little tiny bit of grease seeping out from around the outside of the bearing there. So that leads me to believe that it is a grease-packed ball bearing type bearing system. Now, there's not a whole lot to see in terms of the wheels guts, but I do just want to quickly show you while we've got this apart how the spring mechanism and micro switches for the paddles work. So all that's actually providing the spring force there for the paddles is these little plastic tabs here at all. Now, I've never had those break, so I don't see that to be a problem at all, but I wanted to show you how exactly that works. So there's no mechanical springs, no metal pieces or anything like that, just the plastic. And then if we have a look at the back of the wheel, you can see two basic micro switches, one for each paddle, and that's it. You can also see the mechanism down there for the 24-way switch as well, but we're not going to turn that or fiddle with that too much while things are apart because I don't want things to fall apart on me. And everything else appears to be pretty straightforward here. In terms of communication between the wheel and the motherboard or the main board that we looked at just before, we've only got the one 7-pin connector here. So it appears to be some sort of a CAN bus style system that communicates back with the motherboard rather than an individual connection for each individual function. That would explain the brains that we can see here in the background as well. But anyway, let's get this all put back together and take a more detailed look at the pedals. So just before we move on with this disassembly, I just want to show you something that's pretty cool about these pedals. A lot of people don't realize that you can do this. So on the back side, we've got these little plastic tabs, and on the inside of these mounts here, you can see there's 3 different positions. So what we can do is we can actually move the pedals across in 3 different positions there to give us the spacing that we desire. So say you have really wide feet, for example, you can move it all the way over to the right hand side, and you could move your brake over to this side. Or if you're doing a lot of heel and toe, you might want to have them quite close together, so you could move them like that. So lots of different configurations that you can do for all 3 pedals, just to give that little extra bit of personalization and customization there. So just wanted to point that out. Now, if we flip the pedals over quickly as well, we've got 6 mounting holes on the bottom that we can use to mount this to a rig. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And most rigs that are available these days do have pre-drilled holes in the correct position for Logitech pedals, so that minimizes the amount of stuffing around. Up the top here, you can see we also have this clever little carpet spike type arrangement. So we flip the little button here, and that flicks down, and it is identical to the design of the previous generation pedals. But yeah, this does do a good job on short pile carpet, at least, of keeping the pedals relatively firm. But anyway, we'll continue with the disassembly now. One thing that I do just want to quickly point out with this disassembly is you need to undo all the screws around the perimeter. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now there are 2 little screws underneath the carpet spike there as well that you can just see, one there and one there. So you just need to make sure you undo those as well. The first time I undid a set of these pedals, I actually nearly snapped the plastic because I didn't realize that those screws were there and was trying to sort of pull it out, nearly broke it. So just make sure you undo all of the screws, and then the cover will pop off. Now you need to be very careful because the cables internally here are very, very fragile. You need to make sure you undo the screws or loosen the screws for the strain relief here before you try to take the lid off completely. So internally we have what appears to be exactly the same design again as the G920 and G29 pedals. So potentiometers again on each of the pedals. You can see the little cylinders, 1, 2, 3, and as we push the pedals down, that rotates, and that gives a variable amount of resistance, which is then interpreted by the wheelbase as a pedal position. So we're not using load cells or anything like that, but as a lot of you guys would be familiar, there are some pretty good load cell upgrades available for the G920 and G29 pedals, as well as some of the older pedals too. Now, I don't see any reason here why those wouldn't also be compatible with these pedals. We do still have the standard serial port connection here. So yeah, any accessories that worked with the previous pedals should also work with these pedals too, at least from what I can see here. I can tell you that the throttle and the clutch don't feel massively different from my G920, but remember that again, that is 5 years old now, so the springs probably have loosened up a little bit, maybe a little more firm than the G920, but not a whole lot in it, certainly nothing to write home about. But let's just quickly pop the covers off the spring assemblies as well, so we can have a quick look inside at what we've got going on there, because this is where I believe the changes are with the G923. Okay, that is probably going to be an absolute nightmare to put back together again, but these are the things we do. So let's just pop that out quickly. Grab the little insert out as well so it doesn't get lost. And let's pop the cap off here. Okay, so yeah, that is a different spring to what we had in the other unit. So you can see their progressive spring rate, and this is what they were talking about. So let's just move this over to the side quickly so it's out of the way. So this is what's referred to as a progressive spring, and some people might be familiar with these from car suspension as well. They're quite frequently used there. So it's progressive in the sense that the spring rate changes throughout the length of the springs. So you can see here, as we squish the spring in, the initial part actually goes in a little bit more easily than the second part, and that gives us that nice progressive, or that change in the spring rate as we push the pedal down. That gives us a little bit more control. Now, if we compare that to the spring from the G920, let's quickly bring this one across. We'll move the inserts again so we don't lose them. And there we go. That is the factory spring from the G920. So hold them side by side. Progressive spring in the G923 and a standard single rate spring for the G920 and G29. So we'll quickly have a look at the other springs as well, see if they're any different. I'm not sure if they will be or not, but we may as well take a look. Okay, so throttle spring looks to be absolutely identical. So yeah, there you go. That is the G920 and G29, and that is the G923. You can see the spring's a little longer, maybe like 1 millimeter, but I'd say that's probably just from the spring compressing over time rather than because it's a different spring. But the thickness and everything else is absolutely identical. So we'll pop that back. We won't get them muddled up. So looks like it might be exactly the same, I think. Yep, so G920 and G923, absolutely identical. So because this design has been around so long, people have come up with all sorts of creative modifications and different ways to mount these pedals. So what you can do, we already talked about some of the upgrades in terms of different springs and load cells, things like that, which should be compatible with these pedals too. But just for those who might be new to these pedals entirely, what you can do is actually remove the 4 screws that hold each of the pedals in place in the plastic shell, and then mount them however you want on a standard pedal plate, or even invert them, mount them upside down on a piece of wood, or however you want to do. So because they do have that sort of semi-modular design, they are very versatile in the different mounting options. So I just wanted to point that out to you while we had it apart as well. But we'll put the clothes back on now and get into the software and driving. All right, so we're all plugged in and up and running here. As you would expect, very plug and play, no issues whatsoever with connection to the PC. Drivers installed themselves all automatically with the Logitech G Hub software installed. Now, what I wanted to do is just quickly show you a little bit through this G Hub software, because this has come a long way in the last couple of years. Logitech have done a really good job of integrating all of their various different gaming peripherals together into this one convenient piece of software. And it's very clever, because it kind of entices you to want to buy all Logitech stuff. And it's certainly been the case with me. As you can see, I have had a G903. I did a review on this over 2 years ago now, as well as the PowerPlay mat, and those have both been absolutely brilliant. We just got our hands on the G915 and the Pro X wireless headset as well, so I'm going to be testing those out over the next few months. But over here we have the G923. You can see all of these you can click into each one and you get all sorts of settings that you can adjust for each, but we don't need to go into that for the sake of this video. But we'll go across now to the G923. Now, importantly, if you do have a G29 or G920, that does integrate with this software as well. So this isn't an upgrade that comes with a G923, so to speak, but it is just something that I wanted to draw attention to before we get started. But we'll click on the G923 here, and you can see we've got all sorts of different assignments here that we can configure. So we've got a nice little graphic here that shows all of the inputs, and we can zoom in and zoom out on those as well to click on each one. Really, really cool software, really classy. And I mean, honestly, I think that the likes of Fnatic and even Simucube could learn a lot from this, because it's so clean to use, it's so tidy, so intuitive, and it really has that premium feel to it. But anyway, so what we can see here on the left is a list of all the commands that are available within Windows. So say, for example, you wanted to play a trick on your mate and assign the shift up to Alt F4, so when they go to change up gears, it quits the game. You just drag that to gear up, and that will change that for you. So obviously I don't recommend that you actually do that, because it's likely to end with you getting in lots of trouble, but you could do it if you wanted to. And you can also switch on and off buttons as well. So you can use the default command, switch it back to default if you have been played with, and then go back to use default, or you can disable the command entirely as well if you've got a button that you're accidentally pressing quite frequently. I'm going to talk about the actual physical ergonomics of the wheel in just a moment when we get driving as well, because that is one area that I really wish they had improved. But anyway, we'll push forward. We've got keys here. So these are hotkeys that you can assign as well. So if you're running a game that doesn't have its own commands built in, but uses Windows assigned hotkeys, you can drag and drop those onto the wheel as well. So that's very useful. Actions, so these are little software applications, so OBS control, for example. So if you're a streamer and you don't have access to dedicated control surfaces for streaming and things like that, you can assign your starting and stopping and scenes and all those sorts of things to buttons on the wheel as well. So again, very useful, and it's great that they've gone to the lengths to really sort of integrate as much as they possibly can into the wheel, so that you don't need to spend a fortune on third-party applications to get the bare basics done. Well, you can also record macros, so you can create a new macro and then drag drag that to a button as well. We don't really need to go all through that now though. And then under system as well, we have things like copy, paste, undo, operating systems, so switching to lock screen. These are the kinds of functions that are probably not going to be quite so useful for people other than maybe the audio input, volume up and down. So you could, for example, assign the volume to the control dial. So we go here, we can go clockwise, volume up, and counterclockwise, volume down, and so forth. So extremely customizable here and very, very impressive in my opinion. So let's click on down to steering wheel settings now. This is where we set up the driver level settings. And you can see there's not a whole lot to adjust here, maybe a little less than I had hoped for, but we've got an adjustment for operating range here. So this is the range of movement that we have available to us in the wheel. Now, importantly here, if we do crank that down to say 180 degrees, you can see when I turn the wheel, the software or soft bump stop is limiting us to 180 degrees of movement, but the wheel itself doesn't stop. So unlike the more expensive belt-driven and direct drive wheels, we don't get a mechanical bump stop that is adjustable through software, so just be aware of that. Doesn't really matter in the great scheme of things, but if you are wanting to sort of feel that bump stop as you reach the end, you're not going to. It's just going to keep turning. We'll go back up to 900 degrees again for now. We've got a sensitivity adjustment as well. Obviously, that adjusts how much you have to turn the wheel physically to equate to how much it actually turns inside the game. Then we have a centering spring strength adjustment here as well. So this is how strongly the wheel tries to force itself back into the middle. So you can see here with the centering spring in non-force feedback games checkbox is disabled, that is grayed out. So that's actually controlled by the game itself when that's turned off. When you click this on, it gives you physical control over this setting for games that don't have their own force feedback. There's not too many of those around these days, but you do have the option there should you need it. But we're going to turn that back off again for now. And then if we scroll down, we have the new TRUEFORCE setting. So again, if you're wanting to know more about exactly how TRUEFORCE works, we do have another video where I went into all the details on how it all works in the software side. But essentially what this is doing is it's taking telemetry data from the game as well as the audio output signal and using it to create effects within the game through the motors that are inside the wheel. So there's no additional motors inside the wheel, and we established that when we pulled it apart. But what it's doing is using the dual motor system to create these effects through its own API, which sits outside of the normal UDP telemetry data that's available through these games. But definitely do check out that previous video where we went into a lot more detail on exactly how TRUEFORCE works. So we have a setting here, apply settings from the game. So again, this is allowing the game to determine exactly how things feel. We can switch that off and that gives us manual control of both the torque and the audio effects. So interestingly, it's working kind of like a butt kicker system in that it's able to interpret the audio signals and then translate those into force feedback through those motors as we discussed before. But we're going to leave that set to apply settings from game. And then lastly, let's just quickly jump down to pedal sensitivity as well. Now, I was able to confirm with Logitech that they are still 8-bit pedals, so that does limit the resolution in terms of when you press the pedal, how many different steps you get. But look, I mean, honestly, there's a little bit of lag there in the software, and I'm sure that's not going to be present when we actually go for a drive. We'll comment on it if it is a problem. But you can see there, the finest little movements of the pedal are related back in the driver software there. So look, I don't see the resolution being an issue for anybody. I really don't think you're going to feel the difference in pedals of this quality level. I think, you know, when you move up to really, really high-end hydraulic pedals and things like that, then yeah, absolutely, it can make a difference. But for this, I really don't see that being a problem. So as we said before, throttle pedal and clutch pedal feel exactly the same as they did before on the previous models. But the brake pedal is showing me some really good signs even before we go for our first drive here. So with that progressive spring, I can tell you that the change in pressure is taking place at around the sort of 70 to 80% brake pressure mark. And that is exactly how I like to set up my HE Ultimate pedals as well. So I've got those set up so that, you know, the change in pressure where I start to feel the increase is around about that 70 to 80% pressure point. And the reason why I like to set it up that way is it helps me set muscle memory at around about the point where ABS would kick in or the wheels would start to lock up. So obviously it does vary a little bit depending on different cars, but I find 70 to 80% brake pressure is generally about where you want that to be. So that is a really good sign straight off the bat before we even go for a drive there. And I think that's a big improvement on Logitech's part with these new pedals. So thumbs up there. But we have the usual adjustments here for sensitivity for clutch, brake, and accelerator. So we can, of course, adjust that sensitivity if we wish to do so. So in the case of the brake, if we wanted to make it so that that change in pressure was a little bit lower for cars that might be a little bit more sensitive on the brakes. So say the Porsche 911 GT3R in iRacing, for example, we can adjust this value to our preference, and then obviously the same for accelerator as well. Now it is worth noting we do have the combined pedal setting here as well for games that aren't so simulator friendly, and that allows us to combine the brake and accelerator into one axis. So you can see when I press the brake, the axis moves down. When I press the throttle, the axis moves up. And then we've got a separate one for clutch. So some sim titles do still need that. Some of the older ones do. But for most people, you're going to be leaving that switched off. But anyway, I think that's all we need to cover in terms of the software. I just wanted to give you a quick run through and show you just how polished and pleasant this software is to run with. So dual clutch, this is actually very easy to use and quite effective. So what we want to do to get it started is hold in both paddles and the L1 and R3 buttons simultaneously, or LSB and RSB if you're on the Xbox version. So hold those in for 2 seconds. You'll see the car will stall in the game. That's fine. You need to set this up before you're actually starting a race. But once you've got it all set up, you shouldn't need to change it again until you change to a different car, of course. So we're going to put the brake back on so we don't roll around in the pits. We're in neutral there. So what we're going to do now is choose a button to activate the dual clutch. So we can only choose between L3 or R3 or LSB and RSB if you're on the Xbox again. So we'll choose L3. And you'll see the lights will flash there. Now we've got red. So what we want to do now is put our foot all the way on the clutch. You can see the blue bar there going up in iRacing. And then we're going to put our foot all the way onto the accelerator as well. And what we want to do is we want to put it into first gear and then find the point where the clutch starts to bite. So in this car, we know that it's going to be around about the midway up the mark. So we'll put it in first gear, apply some throttle. And then what we want to do is start pressing the down arrow. And you can see there the clutch is going down even though we've got our foot flat on the accelerator. You can see there the handbrake's released and we're starting to get a little bit of bite here now. So the car's starting to move forward. We want to go a little bit more than that still though, a little bit down to about here I think is good for this car. And then we can test it. So before we go out of the mode, we can just test it here. So we're going to go back into neutral, start the engine again. So we can do a quick practice start here before we go out of the setting mode, just in case we need to do any fine tuning adjustment. So what we'll do is put our thumb on L3 and you can see the clutch there goes back up to 100%. So that's our dual clutch activated. We're going to shift it into first gear. You can see the handbrake's on. Shift into first gear, apply the amount of throttle that we want to launch the car. And then when the lights go green, we're going to let go of L3 and that's going to take us to our bite point automatically. So we'll let go, 1, 2, 3, go. And then we let the clutch out the rest of the way and off we go on our merry way. Simple as that. So if you need to make any more fine-tuning adjustments while you're in this mode, you can simply go up and down like we did before and you can see the clutch is adjusting itself. And once you're happy with the setting, hit the enter key, you'll see it flashes and that is your dual clutch all set up. So we'll do one more launch here quickly. 3, 2, 1, go. Bit of wheel spin that time, but you get the point. Takes a bit of practice, but yeah, definitely a useful tool and something that I think will help out a lot of people. So that is how you use dual clutch. So on to the driving test now. And the first thing that I did was test the G920 and G923 back to back in multiple different sim titles with TRUEFORCE switched off. And the reason why I did that is I wanted to establish, first of all, what kind of differences there were, if any, between the two different wheelbases in terms of their feel without TRUEFORCE being a part of the equation. And I can tell you that at least to my senses, there was very little difference between them. So I can only sort of, I guess, deduce from that the increased polling rate and additional processing power is going mostly towards TRUEFORCE. Now we'll elaborate on the subtle nuances of the G923 in just a moment, but suffice to say for now that it feels pretty much exactly the same as the G920 does without TRUEFORCE enabled. And just like with the G29 and G920 and the G27 and G25 before that, you can feel all the details that you need to feel to go fast. And something that I always point out to people is that some of the fastest guys in sim racing indeed do use these wheels in their day-to-day rigs, and they actually prefer to drive with the force feedback levels turned down so that they're not sort of having to fight against the wheel. They only feel the things that they need to feel to drive quickly. Now, TRUEFORCE aside as well, consistency between different sim titles was also very, very good with the G923 as well, as I expected. And this is something that I've talked about a little bit before on the channel. One of the issues that can arise from more high-end sim rigs is that the feeling between different sim titles can be quite different. So you kind of have to learn to drive all over again every time you change titles. And that's something that I've always appreciated about Logitech and Fnatic in particular, is that you can jump in pretty much any sim sim, and the feeling is quite similar, so there isn't a steep learning curve every time you change. There was also absolutely minimal setup required between different sims as well, so all you had to do was just bind your controls. In many cases, there were presets already present, so as soon as you plugged in the wheel, it detected it and all the settings were just ready to go. So I never needed to spend more than maybe 3 minutes getting any particular sim running before I could just jump in and drive, which was much appreciated. Now let's explore the nuances of the wheel in a little bit more detail. Now, one of the things that I've seen many people complain about over the years is the noise of these wheels, and unfortunately it is no better with the G923. It is still quite loud to operate. Now, you don't really notice this when you're wearing headphones or when you've got your speakers turned up, but if you are in close proximity to people that are trying to sleep or study, then you might want to look elsewhere, maybe towards a belt-driven wheel. They are a little bit more expensive, but they are significantly quieter. So I'll let you have a quick listen now to how loud the wheel is with TRUEFORCE disabled. And now with TRUEFORCE turned on. So it's actually quite a strange experience. You can kind of hear the engine sounds and the game audio coming through the wheel, which is very strange the first time you hear it. Very similar to if you've used a butt kicker or some other transducer system that is driven by the audio signal out of the game before. So before we move on to TRUEFORCE, let's just talk quickly about the pedals. As I expected based on my observations before we even started driving, it was much easier to determine muscle memory, find that sort of threshold of braking performance, and limit the amount of locking up and pushing into ABS. Finding the correct braking point and establishing muscle memory was much easier on these pedals than the previous models have been, and I was able to turn pretty consistent lap times within probably 10 minutes of learning to drive with these pedals, which impressed me quite a lot. But just keep in mind that there are much cheaper upgrade kits available, such as aftermarket springs, load cell kits, and things like that. So I certainly wouldn't say that this is a reason to rush out and upgrade from a G29 or G920 to the G923. So one last thing we do need to cover before we talk about TRUEFORCE is ergonomics of this wheel. There were a few little things that did annoy me that I feel they could have upgraded with the newer model. So let's just quickly look at that in a bit more detail. So let's talk a little bit more about the ergonomics of this wheel. So there's some things that I really like about it and some things that I feel are missed opportunities. Now, when I first used a Logitech G920 after using a 27 for a long time, one of the first things I noticed was the lack of buttons on the sides here. You'll remember on the G27, we had 3 buttons on either side, and while they were quite cheap and nasty buttons, they were very easy to reach while you were driving without sort of having to roll your hands or move your hands around at all. And I actually used those extensively for F1 games in particular to change things like ERS modes, fuel trims, and things like that. And one thing that I noticed when I changed to a G920 is that it was much harder to reach the buttons while driving. So the only 2 buttons that you can really reach without rolling your hands are the left button here and the circle button here. And I actually use that for DRS deployment and that for my pit limiter in the F1 games now. But changing other engine modes and things like that are a little bit more tricky on this wheel than they used to be with the 27, because you can't just quickly reach across. You're going to have to roll your hand and go up and down. Now, you do adapt to it quickly, and what I've done is I've actually changed this to be my fuel trim and this to be my ERS deployment modes. But yeah, it's just something that I wanted to point out because I do feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity with an upgrade to a new model wheel, particularly after 5 years. I would have liked to have seen a couple of buttons maybe up here or somewhere where they're a little bit more easy to reach ergonomically. But I will say that all the buttons that are there do feel relatively sturdy, with the exception of the R3 and L3 buttons. Those do feel a little bit plasticky. Everything else feels pretty good. The rotary dial here is rubberized as well, so that has quite a nice feel to it. And it does have a nice tactile feel as you spin it as well. It does have a nice click into each position as well, so it's relatively easy to sort of turn without having to look at it and take your eyes off the road. But otherwise, I think they've nailed pretty much all the other important stuff. Being a relatively round wheel wheel with only a small D shape there. It's easy to drift with as well. You can easily slip the wheel through your hands, and being a 280mm diameter, I think was a good choice too. I've seen a few people complain that it's not bigger, but with the amount of leverage that you have at 280mm, it feels about right to counteract the forces that the motors are able to put out. And obviously, as you increase the diameter of the wheel, you are increasing your leverage that's fighting against the motors, so that it is an important consideration there as well. But yeah, the leather feels nice. Everything else about it feels good. And just while we're here as well, I can show you there is a little tiny bit of flex there in the hub. That's not the platform moving at all on the table. That is the wheel moving. Not really noticeable while you're driving, but just something that I think is important to point out just for the sake of completeness. And that is consistent across both the G923s here that I have in the studio, as well as my 5-year-old G920. All right, so on to TRUEFORCE. Now, this is by far the thing that they've talked up the most and the biggest, most compelling reason to potentially upgrade from the previous models to this model. So let's spend a bit of time talking about this. So the only titles that it's compatible with on PC at launch are iRacing, Assetto Corsa Competizione, and Grid 2019. And I did test it out with all 3 titles. If you have a PlayStation, then it is also compatible with Gran Turismo Sport, but I don't have one of those, so I wasn't able to test it on that. But nonetheless, we were able to get a pretty broad spectrum picture of exactly what this has to offer. So as soon as I switched this on, I was genuinely amazed at how much difference it made. It wasn't necessarily adding any additional detail that would make me go faster, and that isn't what I expected at all, but the immersion level genuinely did go through the roof, and it actually took me by surprise because I expected that it would feel a little bit weird. I mean, we understand that most of what it's doing is generating the sort of effects that you would normally feel through a transducer system, as we mentioned before, like a butt kicker, and I'm used to having one of those on my rig, so it kind of wasn't all that foreign feeling to me. But the sensation of those details coming through your hands rather than through the seat of your pants was something that I thought might be a little bit sort of strange, because it's not really how it works in the real world. But I was amazed at how quickly my brain actually adapted to it and actually started to feel natural. So at first, when I first switched it on, it was kind of like, whoa. And then once I got used to it, I did genuinely enjoy it. And I'll go as far as to say that when I jumped back into my daily driver rig, I intentionally drove with my Butt Kicker Gamer 2 switched off. And I genuinely felt, despite the fact that I'm using a Simucube 2 Ultimate and a motion platform, that there was some detail there missing that I craved. So I certainly wouldn't say that TRUEFORCE is a gimmick, but it certainly isn't adding anything that is going to make you faster. So it is purely down to just the level of immersion that you want to experience. In particular, I really enjoyed the sensation of gear changes. Every time you change up or down gear, you really do feel the clunk of the engine through the wheel, which is quite cool. And again, although that isn't something that you would normally feel through the steering wheel, your brain does a pretty amazing job of kind of rewiring itself to interpret that correctly, and it doesn't feel strange really at all after a little while. I was also quite impressed with how the engine RPM feeling is translated through as well. I thought this might feel a little bit too sort of overpowering, and I was genuinely concerned that you know, having that detail coming through the same motors in the wheel as the force feedback, it might actually pull away. Kind of like with an audio system, if you crank the bass up too high, it can kind of pull some of the detail away from the mids and highs. I kind of thought that might happen here, but honestly, I didn't feel at any point like the details that I needed to feel to drive quickly and consistently were being diminished at all by TRUEFORCE, which really impressed me, because that's something that I was quite concerned about going into this. So taking a deeper dive now into some of the nuances around particular sim titles, I expected that Assetto Corsa Competizione would probably feel the best to me out of the compatible titles, but I actually found that iRacing felt the best overall. Assetto Corsa Competizione kind of felt like it was just taking the game's audio and translating that through the wheel. So although it did add that extra detail, it kind of just felt like having a subwoofer sitting underneath you but coming through your hands, rather than it really sort of adding fine details like textures and you know, road bumps and gear changes and things like that. Whereas when I jumped into iRacing, that was quite a different experience. So that really started to bring out some of the subtle nuances in TRUEFORCE, and that's where I really started to appreciate it for what it is. Now, Grid 2019 is a very fun game, but obviously not a simulation style game. It's more of an arcade style, and so the force feedback quality there isn't as high to begin with. But again, I was able to sort of feel all the things I needed to feel to adapt to it quite quickly and have a ton of fun. And again, I genuinely felt like TRUEFORCE did add that extra level of immersion and that extra little bit of fun to the gameplay overall. So definitely a worthwhile addition there too. So I definitely did feel like something was missing when I then jumped back into other games that didn't support TRUEFORCE, particularly F1 2020. I was quite disappointed that that's not compatible, being a new title, and hopefully compatibility will be added into the future, given that Grid is also a Codemasters title and that is compatible with it. So fingers crossed there. We can't make any guarantees, obviously. I don't know personally, but that is definitely something that I would love to see. So with all that said and done, where does this land us in terms of value for money? So Look, my honest feelings, and I've got to be completely honest with you guys, I feel like it is a little bit too expensive for what it is. I mean, the quality of the force feedback is quite good, and it is a noticeable improvement over previous generations for those titles that are TRUEFORCE compatible. And I really am excited genuinely to see where TRUEFORCE goes into the future as compatibility is added for new software and also, you know, potentially new products from Logitech as well. Now, I don't have any insider information there whatsoever, but I kind of just get the sense that, you know, we might end up seeing some more high-end software from them in the not too distant future. I feel like there's been a lot of effort gone into TRUEFORCE, and, you know, it has actually exceeded my expectations in terms of what it brings to the table. So I feel like it's maybe a little bit wasted on an entry-level wheel or otherwise entry-level wheel like the G923. So I kind of get the impression that they might have something a little bit more up their sleeve in the future. So that is something that I am pretty excited about. But look, I mean, you've got to consider when you look at the price of this wheel, the fact that, you know, we do still have the G920 and the G29 available, and they have confirmed with me, at least in Australia, that they are going to continue to range those. So those are still going to be considered the more entry-level wheel, and this sort of being a step up from that. But when you push into the 800 Australian dollar territory, you are starting to compare to, you know, your Thrustmaster belt-driven wheels, your Fanatec CSL Elite packages as well are only a couple of $100 more expensive than that. And while that particular kit doesn't include a clutch pedal, so you would have to spend a little bit more to get the same level of functionality that you get here overall, the overall refinement, smoothness, quietness, and just the overall quality of the force feedback that you get with a Fanatec CSL Elite, for example, is, you know, it is better than what you get with the G920. And there really is no way around that. I genuinely feel like Logitech software is the best that I have used out of all the different sim hardware that I've used. So Simucube, you know, Fanatec, all those brands. I think that they could learn a thing or two, as I said before in the video, from the way Logitech has implemented their software. It's very simple to use, and while it doesn't have the adjustability that other titles do, the ease of use really does make up for that in many ways, and that is something that I would really love to see other brands sort of step up and take note of, because I think that it is an area that could definitely be improved. But for me at least, I think that if you were a G920 or a G29 owner looking to upgrade to the G923, I think your money would be better off spent on some sort of a transducer system like a Butt Kicker Gamer 2, for example. I feel like, you know, that offers a very similar type of force feedback feeling in what it delivers in terms of haptic feedback, but it's delivering it to your body in a way that is more natural. It's coming through the seat of your pants, obviously depending on how you mount it, rather than through your hands. And that does lend itself to a higher level of realism overall, but it does also add complexity to the system as well. And that is something that should be noted. So if you're wanting, you know, a little bit of extra haptic feedback, or a lot of extra haptic feedback, I should say, but packaged in the most simple way possible, then the G923 might be the better option for you. But yeah, look, I would struggle to recommend this as an upgrade for owners of a G920 or a G29. I just don't think that the level of upgrade that this represents is worth the extra money. But for those who are in the market for their very first entry-level wheel and want something a little more than the G920 or the G29 have to offer, then this is definitely something worth looking at. But just do keep in mind that you don't have to push much further price-wise to start pushing into that belt-driven territory where, you know, things really do start to snowball and the quality does become quite a lot better. But yeah, you do just need to consider what else you can get for the money once you're starting to push into that price range. But that said, overall, I do have to say that TRUEFORCE has genuinely impressed me. And as I said before, I am very excited to see what this will bring to the table into the future with potential future products as well. I don't feel like it's a gimmick, and I think that was probably the thing that I was most concerned about. I thought that it might just be a marketing stunt. It might just be something that is really kind of glitchy and gimmicky and doesn't really add anything of value to the overall driving experience. But as I said, although it's not adding anything that's going to make you faster or more consistent, it definitely does add to the overall level of immersion, and more so than I expected it would do. So yeah, I think it's a thumbs up from me in terms of the technology. I just feel like it is a little bit too expensive at the price point that it's retailing for. I think if it was $100 Australian cheaper, then it would be a different story for me. I'd be singing its praises. I'd be jumping up and down and saying, absolutely guys, give this a try. You'll be blown away by how much better it is on the games, at least, that support TRUEFORCE. But yeah, I think that the best way to put it is that at the price that this is being sold at the moment, at least, the price may drop, I don't know, but it's sitting at an awkward point in the market where it's not quite at the level of a CSL Elite, for example, but it is, you know, it is better than a G920 or a G29, at least in the games that support TRUEFORCE. So I think that's pretty much it, guys. Hopefully you have found the video useful and interesting. I know that it's been a long one, but you guys have had a lot of questions, and I wanted to sort of try to dive into as much detail as I possibly can to answer as many of those questions as I could in the video. So thank you for sticking around. If you do have any further questions, hit me up in the comments below as well. And I will be holding on to a G923 as well to see how it evolves over time and how it's implemented into further games as well. So I will have opportunities to do more testing for you guys, but I think that pretty much covers everything that we need to for today. So thank you guys very much for watching. And as I said at the top end of this video, if you have decided that you want to pick up one of these wheels, I do have some links in the description below for you guys, and I really do appreciate your support there. It goes a long way to helping out keeping this channel running. So thank you very much for that. But above all, thank you very much as always for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, leave a thumbs up. Consider subscribing as well if you aren't already. And I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.